We're talking first round picks. We're talking second round picks. We're talking these guys that you invested everything into that maybe you can't trust for the fantasy football playoffs here. Starting off with the Bengals guys, right? I mean, obviously, I know where you're coming from. If you are worrying with these Cincinnati players, with no Joe Burrow, it is going to be ugly. Now, the real question is, how far do they fall? We're all in consensus, they fall. Now, what I want to look at is I want to look at the beginning portion of the season for these guys in Chase, Higgins, Mixon. Because we actually were fortunate enough to see what the Cincinnati Bengals look like with bad quarterback play. Now, I understand that, yes, obviously a hobbled Joe Burrow is going to be better than whatever the hell they're throwing out there in the second half of the season. But we need to remember that Burrow was very bad through the first 4 weeks. If you look at the first 4 weeks of this team, you had 3 points scored, 24 points scored, 19 points scored, 3 points scored. And I mean, they were grueling points scored as well. Through the first month of the season, this was one of the worst teams in the NFL, or one of the worst offenses in the NFL, that is. And looking at what Ja'Marr Chase gave you during that time period, Chase was still a target hog. And this is going to be the number one thing that I want to look at with this Ja'Marr Chase profile, where Chase sees 9 targets. Chase has 8, Chase has 15, Chase has 9. Now, of course, the touchdowns aren't there, and typically that's what you're going to expect, right? I mean, whenever the overall offense is worse, you're going to have significantly fewer scoring opportunities, blah, 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 blah. Now, with that being said, if you're going to get this consistent target volume and you are an elite player like Ja'Marr Chase, where we should assume that you have big play potential even with subpar quarterback play, you will still be viable in fantasy. You're still going to be someone that we are looking to start every week. And if we are readjusting our expectations for Chase going forward, instead of him being in there in that top tier wide receivers, instead of him being ahead of A.J. Brown, instead of him being ahead of Stephon Diggs, I think you have to lower your baseline expectation and go, okay, he's an elite receiver with some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL. Who is he? He's Davante Adams. So he goes from being that high-end wide receiver 1 to instead being that low-end wide receiver 1, maybe high-end wide receiver 2 that we're starting every single week, regardless of matchup. Based off his talent profile, he just doesn't have the ceiling that someone like A.J. Brown would. Now, going over to T. Higgins, we got to see what T. Higgins looks like in this offense as well. And the primary difference between Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase is Higgins can win with efficiency, but he's not going to go out there and he's not going to dominate for over 10 targets per game like we saw from Ja'Marr Chase. Instead, if you look at that first month of the season, Higgins has 8 targets, 12 targets, 8 targets, 4 targets. And in these games, you have an occasional Higgins spike where you see Higgins go out there. He has 89 receiving yards and multiple receiving touchdowns. And that's cool. And I think that T. Higgins, obviously the talent that he is, will have a week-to-week ceiling where randomly in a best ball draft on Underdog, maybe T. Higgins makes some noise. But in reality, is T. Higgins now someone that we can comfortably rely upon? I would say probably not, right? I mean, you could be a very talented wide receiver 2 in an elite offense and still be great in fantasy. However, the issue is when you go to that bad offense, it's going to be significantly tougher to still be viable. So while Chase is like Zach Wilson, while Chase is like Davante Adams, if we're going to go ahead, if we're going to be looking at T. Higgins here, I would say T. Higgins is more so the Chris Godwin this year, but with even worse quarterback play, where you're the number 2 option in your offense, but you're not super excited about the offense overall. Now, Joe Mixon, if you are looking at him, will get there just based off of raw volume. I mean, you can look at every single week this season. Joe Mixon's going out there and he's grueling together 13 to 16 carries. I mean, it's pretty much like clockwork with Mixon. He's also going to go out there and he's also going to have 3 to 4 targets every single week, regardless of what happens. With that being said, the baseline expectation that you have to change with Mixon is he is going to have significantly less touchdown upside. If you look at Joe Mixon through the first, say, 5-ish weeks of the season, where you had a bad quarterback in there with a hobbled Burrow, versus the last 5 weeks, he had 1 touchdown inside the first 5 weeks, whereas he had 4 touchdowns over the last 5. So with Joe Mixon, he goes down to being a inefficient running back 2 with a cap ceiling when it comes to his touchdowns. So I would say he's almost Similar to what we have with the Chase to Adams comparison with Jacobs. However, Jacobs is a younger back that I want to say at this point in their respective careers also has a little bit more juice. So I'd say Joe Mixon is a worse Josh Jacobs at this point. Now going over to Pittsburgh. Yeah, the sky's falling. We've had both Pickens and Deontay Johnson at sell high moments over the past month to 5 weeks, depending on the receiver. And the simple reason being is if you look at both guys being stuck in a horrendous offense, they're going to eat into each other in one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And I understand, yes, the Steelers win football games, right? So it's hard to like really sit here and say that they are as bad as they really, no, dive into the Kenny Pickett volume. Kenny Pickett has had one game in his NFL career, which is 2 seasons now, of 2 passing touchdowns. One game. Kenny Pickett, if you look at the passing yardage over the past month, this is worse than what you have in like Cleveland in offense we're about to talk about. 73 passing yards against Jacksonville. Then 160, 126, 106. It doesn't matter if Deontay Johnson goes, you know what? I'm an alpha. Deontay Johnson comes and says, I don't care about Pickens. I don't care about anybody in this offense. I'm taking 50% of the overall receiving yardage. If he was able to establish a market share number like that, he would go down as the best wide receiver in the NFL. It's not happening, of course. But even if he were to do that, he's averaging 70 receiving yards a game with how bad this overall passing offense is. See, I think Kenny Pickett's a bottom 5 quarterback in the NFL. He has not really improved much at all. I mean, at least from a fantasy perspective, this is a complete dumpster fire where you cannot start anybody unless they start using Jalen Warren a little bit more. Now, going over to another wide receiver, let's look at Amari Cooper here. Now, with Amari, you have 4 receptions for 34 receiving yards. But we've seen Amari with and without Deshaun Watson so far this season. And with Deshaun Watson, I mean, it's cookies and cream out there. He's going out there, 139 receiving yards, receiving touchdown. With Deshaun Watson, 116 receiving yards, receiving touchdown. I mean, he had some pretty quality weeks with Watson. The issue is if you look at the new quarterback play that we have in Cleveland, it's not a quarterback that can push the ball to the boundaries. If you look at the target distribution and what we have for the Cleveland Browns this week, while Amari does have 8 targets, that's great. You had 45 passing attempts in this offense. David Njoku had 15 targets in this offense. So the wide receivers really not going to be able to dominate on the boundary. That's typically what we've seen from Amari, at least with how he's implemented in Cleveland. Whereas Elijah Moore, David Njoku will be a little bit more over the middle for these roles. So Amari Cooper, I mean, on Underdog, they had like 42.5 receiving yards this week for his pick'em. I know a lot of people are excited to go through and take the more than. He got like 34 yards. I think that going forward, you should probably expect a very similar mark for his Underdog pick'em. I mean, the projection's going to be low 40 yardage total every week. And he's probably going to be a low-end wide receiver 3. And of course, if you're saying, Mason, I would always take the more than 30 receiving yards on. If you wanted to go and take Amari Cooper to have more than 44.5 yards, find that on Underdog. My favorite pick him on Underdog for tonight is going to be Devonta Smith for more receptions than Rashee Rice. Now, Rashee Rice would get an extra half a reception there, but still. And yeah, if you wanted to check out any of those pick 'ems on Underdog, promo code FLOCK will get you a 100% deposit match, plus a rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And on top of that, ladies and gentlemen, a Patrick Mahomes special pick 'em more than less than half a total yards. So make sure you take advantage of it. Now, going over to Derrick Henry, just an update with Henry. I mean, same story that we've had all season. In games where the Tennessee Titans are competitive or win, Derrick Henry is going to be great. Let's go to 1-score games with the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry week 1, 120 yards. Derrick Henry week 2, almost 100 yards and the touchdown. Derrick Henry in the win against the Cincinnati Bengals week 4. 122 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. Derrick Henry in the next close game against Atlanta, they win 101 rushing yards. Derrick Henry against Pittsburgh, 100 total yards. If the game is close or if the Tennessee Titans win, Derrick Henry will be a viable option. However, these games where they get boat race, which seems to be happening more and more often, Derrick Henry is just a complete dud, someone that you can't rely upon. Now, I will say, I mean, it's kind of black and white here with Henry. We at least know who he is. And he does have a very good matchup going up against the Panthers. So you can start Derrick Henry right now. Now, I do want to give a little bit of an update with Sam Laporta. I know bad week, right? 18 receiving yards, season low. This is just a clear buy low moment. Like, this is how you know to panic with a player versus if it's just a one-off week where we can go through and buy him low and say it's going to be better rest of season. Sam Laporta is a rookie tight end that is in a very good offense, and underlying these two major traits, if you look at the usage, Sam Laporta is not going anywhere. Sam Laporta's role is just as prominent now as it was earlier in the season. And we are not going to expect a rookie tight end to get worse as his career goes on, right? So if you go back to what we had earlier in the year, you were just getting the consistent 50-ish, 60-ish receiving yards every single week. Every once in a while, you would get the receiving touchdown. So Sam Laporta is still going to be that mid-tight end one that you can comfortably rely upon rest of season. Do not worry whatsoever. Now, going over to Hollywood Brown, I mean, I was going through and saying Hollywood Brown was someone that you shouldn't panic on last week, and now he comes out this week and he has 12 total yards, ladies and gentlemen. He has 5 targets in a game with the Arizona Cardinals offense. Looks good. Kyler Murray looks good. And yeah, this is back-to-back weeks now, 4 or 5 targets, the lowest of the season for Hollywood Brown. What I'm going to fall back on is I'm going to fall back on what we have seen from Hollywood and Kyler historically, in that Kyler Murray is a quarterback that will give the ball to Hollywood. Hollywood averages more targets per game, more receiving yards per game, and more receptions per game, and more fantasy points per game in games where Kyler Murray plays. Now, the longer this trend continues, the more and more we are going to get worried. But I will say as of now, you probably do need to project out Hollywood Brown to still be a low-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Maybe if you want to move him down to the high-end wide receiver 3 mark, you can do that. But comparing Hollywood to some of these other guys, like, would I rather have Hollywood with Kyler or Amari? I'd probably rather have Hollywood. And I drafted way more Amari than Hollywood this year. Would I rather have Hollywood or the Pittsburgh Steelers guys? I'd way rather have Hollywood, even if the Steelers players have been better as of late. I think that the fundamental issues that you have in Pittsburgh are much larger and more serious than what we have in Arizona. Now, let's go over and let's look at Austin Eckler just for a quick check-in. With Eckler, I mean, the reason you would have drafted him in round 1 this year is given his receiving role. Full transparency, Eckler was my least drafted round 1 player in fantasy drafts this year. Y'all know I drafted over 400 teams on Underdog. And avoiding Eckler's big reason why we are winning money on Underdog right now. I wish we'd avoided Cup more. We'll talk about him a little later on. But nonetheless, I mean, if you were drafting Austin Eckler, you were going to be doing it for target volume, target volume, target volume. And once you had the Mike Williams injury, and once you had Quentin Johnson clearly show that he's a bust, I thought Eckler was going to crush me. I thought Eckler was going to go out there and make it where I had no shot to win any money this year. And Eckler would be a guaranteed top 3 running back. That target volume doesn't look nearly as safe as you initially thought it would be with Austin Eckler, where if you were looking at the receptions that you've had from Eckler this season, he's at 24. This week, he gives you 6 receiving yards for 2 receptions. So, I mean, if we're going to count this out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe he's played 8 games, 7 games. He's played 7 games. You're getting about 3.5 receptions per game from Austin Eckler. Well, maybe that's like an added on bonus if you're Rashad White. If you're drafted as like a low-end RB2 and you're like, oh crap, this guy's giving me 3.5, 4 receptions every single game, full BBR format, he's an auto start. If you're drafted round 1, I mean, just that's only going to get it done if you're going to be a great rusher. However, Austin Eckler has had 0 games over 70 rushing yards since week 1 this season. So I just honestly don't understand it. And I'm going to assume that it gets better. Like, I don't understand why Eckler's being less involved as a receiver this season as we've seen historically. Because what we've historically seen is in a game where Mike Williams misses and a game where Keenan Allen misses, Austin Eckler will pick up the slack and Austin Eckler will have more target volume. And that's just simply not happening. Now, going over to the guy that everybody's panicking on, Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp suffers an ankle injury here. looks like a low ankle sprain from what I'm seeing on Twitter. Of course, I don't know. We'll have more information on Monday and Tuesday. Just make sure you subscribe. We'll keep updating you. But Kupp suffers an ankle sprain. And now if you're looking at the past month for Cooper Kupp, this is a wide receiver that has had 29 receiving yards, 21 receiving yards, 48 receiving yards, and 11 receiving yards. If you have started Cooper Kupp over the past month, which, trust me, I have started Cooper Kupp where I've had him over the past month. I have ranked Cooper Kupp as a must-start wide receiver every single week over the past month. I mean, you have just been absolutely crushed. Cooper Kupp has been horrendous. If I look at the FlogFantasy.com community rankings, I've seen that Cooper Kupp's fallen down from being a mid-second round pick down to 30, and that is literally just within the last 3 hours since the game. 4 hours maybe. So I'm going to be interested to see where Cooper Kupp turns out in the FlogFantasy.com community rankings later on Monday, because I think we'll have enough data points there to see how y'all are exactly ranking him. To be fair to Kupp, while he's been horrendous, while he's been an absolute train wreck, the game against Dallas, Stafford gets hurt. The game against Green Bay, you have no Stafford. In the game against Seattle, Kupp himself gets hurt. So what I want to say is I want to say the last 3 weeks don't matter. The last 3 weeks are nothing. His first 2 weeks back, he was vintage Cooper Kupp. We have been printing money on the Cooper Kupp fewer than 13 targets, which I don't know why they keep putting that out on Underdog. I still think that he has a high ceiling, especially if he were to only miss a few weeks here. I mean, people on Twitter saying he may only miss 1 to 2 weeks. I think it's hard to rank him as anything more than like a low-end wide receiver 2, a high-end wide receiver 3 until we get him back, right? Because this is an older wide receiver that was dealing with injuries coming into the season. So, I mean, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. But I think that's all I have for y'all with this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed it, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to tell me for that pick'em on Monday night, Devonta Smith, more receptions than Rashee Rice, going with it because we have no Dallas Goedert. You can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and a Patrick Mahomes special pick on more than less than half a total yard, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day, and I really hope I get to see you in the live stream after the game tonight.